there are these two guys. One's a guy I respect very much, whose name is Rod Dreher, and the other guy happens to be me. And these two guys are giving what I think is contrary advice to the Christian community. Rod is proposing what he calls the Benedict option. In the face of the challenge that I articulated a moment ago, with so many of the institutions of our society now basically governed by a secular progressive ideology. In many cases, even those that are formally Christian have adopted secular, liberal, ideological positions on life, marriage, religious freedom, and so forth, rather than the historic Christian traditions. And then there's my view that this is no time for retreat, quite the opposite, that we should be redoubling our efforts in the public square to bring our testimony to what we believe to the public square, and to really try as best we can to advance the common good as we ourselves understand it in light of our fundamental principles, that we should be fighting for human rights, like the rights of the unborn child. We should be fighting for marriage and the family, no matter how bleak it looks. My view is that in the end, we don't determine whether we get the victory or when we get the victory or how we get the victory. That's up to God. Our job is to be faithful, and it's to be out there bearing witness and doing our best to protect the innocent, doing our best to protect the fundamental institutions without which people will not flourish as human beings. Now, I'm here and Rod's not, but I want you to feel completely free to say he's right and I'm wrong, or to articulate some third position. How do you see it when the question is, should we choose the Benedict option, which doesn't mean completely retreating from the world, but it does mean taking some time, protecting the integrity of our own communities by, to some extent, sealing ourselves off a bit? Or am I right to say we need to be redoubling our efforts in the public square? Is there some third position?
What a great frame. So first of all, that's a debate I'd like to see. I'd enjoy being in the audience for that debate. But then, if I could reframe it a little bit and say, now let's have the same debate again, but only talk about 25-year-olds, and then have the same debate again and only talk about 5-year-olds. And my guess is, though I'm on the Robbie George end of this continuum, I'm completely on your side of the continuum for adults, and I'm at maybe more of a hybridized position for children. And so I think what I think is, as somebody who has named, my wife and I have named our kids things that flow from the Augustinian and Reformation traditions. So one of our kids is named Augustine, pretty theologically heavy for a 6-year-old.
It's the kid I mentioned who goes by Breck.
We call him Breck. Who is Augustine Breckenridge Warfield Sasse. Breckenridge Warfield comes from a place at this institution, not anything about, sort of his origins at a ski place in Colorado. Breck is a kid who we want to raise to understand the two cities and the two loves, and to aspire for reconciliation of these cities in a city that has foundations and where authority is no longer divided between the age that is yet to come and the authorities of this age. But the authorities of this age are to restrain evil, and they're to provide for the common good at a time when the king is not yet reigning in every way in every institution. And so I aspire to have my kid understand those differences and to live among his neighbors in this world. But that's what I aspire for him once he's mature. And he's not yet there. And so I think when I listen to Rod, there are things that I disagree with Rod about in the current book, The Benedictine Option, when I've heard him talk about it. And then I hear other people critiquing him, not you, Professor George, but other people critiquing him. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's not a fair summary of what he's saying. That he's not proposing some sort of true radical separatism. He's saying, are you sure you have enough safe space, a word I'm usually pretty critical of, but do you have enough safe space for a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old? Because I'm not ready to hand my kids over to the world yet. And frankly, our 13 and 15-year-old, we're wrestling with this stage of their life where they're ready to get going and do more stuff in the world. And we're like, yeah, we actually want to still protect you a little bit from certain things in the world. Yeah. And we conceive of parenting not just teenagers, but near teenagers. We talk about it at our house as training wheels removal exercises. It's a metaphor we use in this book a lot. Training wheels, I'm actually a no training wheels guy. I trained all my kids to ride a bike by just putting them on a bike on a slight declining road and then put a helmet on them and a whole bunch of snowsuits, and I ran behind them. And I've trained my 3 kids and a bunch of neighbor kids the same way. I bat them shoulder to shoulder as they're falling down this hill, and eventually they just catch, and they have balance, and they all of a sudden learn how to ride a bike. You can train them in 2 hours as long as you're willing to get a few stitches, both theirs and yours, straddling the back wheel. But anyway, just pretend for a minute I was a training wheels guy. The purpose of training wheels is a means to an end, right? You want to take them off so they can ride the bike next to you. That's what you aspire to. And we have to deliberate as a matter of prudence at what stage are our kids ready to ride the bike off on their own. And I think what Rod at his best means, though I am on your side of this debate, but when I try to put the best spin on his argument, I think what he's really saying is, don't just assume that there's enough shared moral consensus in your neighborhood to just let all authorities speak to your kid like they're equally authorities in their life.
About that, he is plainly correct. And that's why what Wilberforce is doing and what schools like Wilberforce are doing all around the country is so important. I don't like the concept of safe spaces either, but we can use it sort of analogically to say that what Wilberforce does provide is a safe space for the nurturing of young Christians and anybody else who would like to avail themselves of this type of education to grow. To the point that they are able to go out and take on the world.